Hello, I am 9 Dots Guy. The novel Anna Karenina begins with this line. Happy families are all alike, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. I've always loved this quote because I don't think it's just talking about families. I think it points out a fact we all know. When you are in the midst of happiness, the feeling is quite simple and usually the reasons are easy to explain. But if you are having a terrible time, you might feel like you are the first person in history to encounter this specific problem. Every kind of sadness feels unique and tragic. And simple sadness is one thing. But being sad because of something bizarre and eccentric is another thing entirely. Enough to convince you that you'll never be able to properly explain it to another human being. But I'm going to try. Feel free to help yourself to a beer. I'm feeling super self-indulgent right now, and this might take a while. About 10 years ago, I fell into that I'm sad but I don't know why phase for the first time. Of course, I later learned that other people feel this way too, but at the time, I was much more arrogant and stupid than I am now, thinking this feeling made me special. Your 20s are exactly the age for that kind of mindset. Looking back, the problem was obvious. I had just finished reading a pile of books that would define my 20s, authors I still love today, Wang Xiaobo, Arthur C. Clarke, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and so on. I fell into a fantasy, one I'd harbored since I was about 13, that one day I would learn to write as brilliantly as they did. To have that precise beauty of Eileen Zhang, mixed with the vulgarity and humor found in a Jiang Wen movie. It was simply impossible. They were giants. And I was just a plain, slightly antisocial nerd with, let's say, questionable hygiene habits. The problem was I didn't want to do anything else. I dreamed of one day writing a great work, great with a capital G, something perfect. Something I could point to forever as proof that I wasn't a waste of space, proof that even an ogre can tend a beautiful garden. That was the only thing I'd wanted to do since I started reading seriously. It felt like the thrill I imagined of climbing Mount Gonga where no one had ever stood, or exploring the Yarlung Zangpo Grand Canyon. To be the first stranger in a strange land. And right then, I started to realize how impossible, how unachievable that was. Because my writing sucked, but I was only just beginning to notice it. A roommate saw I was sad and restless, so he showed me a movie called Into the Wild. It's a biopic about a real person, Christopher McCandless. He decided he'd had enough of society and ran off to commune with nature. Spoiler alert, actually not a spoiler, it's the man's life. He died tragically and avoidably, alone in Alaska. But the only part one remembered, and the only part every artsy 20-something who watches this movie seems to remember, was the wilderness part. I decided right then and there I wanted to go somewhere, alone. Preferably in nature, preferably for a long time. Because I wasn't made for society, blah blah blah, etc. In that place, for some reason, I would lay down my burdens and live happily ever after. Or at least, hope to escape this weird crisis I was in. So a few months later, I blew the savings from a few years of working on a plane ticket and found myself in Xinjiang. Because it looked very wild. Carrying a heart full of bitterness, anxiety, and confusion, both geographically and spiritually, I desperately wanted to commune with nature. I was sure that would fix something. I volunteered on a ranch in northern Xinjiang for about a year. There was a volunteer travel project, it still exists, highly recommend it. Before I say what comes next, I must emphasize, I didn't have a terrible time doing this generally. Except for the first ranch I worked at, everyone else was lovely. That ranch was run by a couple from Beijing. The only thing they hated more than their own ranch was each other. The passion with which they despised one another was as intense as new lovers adoring each other. Watching them interact was practically an art form. They had moved to this godforsaken place hoping to escape their problems, only to arrive and discover that, in fact, they were the problem. Wake up around 5 a.m., milk the cows, fix the fences. Then get yelled at by the husband for hours because, I'm not kidding, I was too nice to the animals. Then listen to a 3-hour lecture on how urban civilization is going to collapse, and how they, and only they, would be the ones preserving the light of humanity in the post-apocalyptic utopia. They told me that if I worked very hard, they might even let me live there when the apocalypse came. I thought to myself, I'd rather drink paint. I would rather have my balls ripped off by blood-drinking zombies in tomorrow's resource wars than spend one more day with you two vicious, mean-spirited bastards, apocalypse or not. One night, they got upset about me sending WeChat messages to my parents because they explained it was anti-isolationist. I decided that, while this experience was terrible, I'd had enough, so I negotiated a quick escape. On my last day, as an act of what they claimed was extreme benevolence, they let me plant the flower bulbs for that year's garden. I waited until they weren't looking, and spent the next 4 hours painstakingly arranging the bulbs into the most vicious words I could think of. Die, idiot, screw off, and so on. I happily imagine that one day, a few weeks later, while drinking their morning coffee that tasted as weak as piss, they looked out at the garden wistfully, noticed my masterpiece sprouting from the earth, and then spontaneously combusted on the spot. I later worked at quite a few homestays and farms. Truly, everyone else was very kind, and every experience was different. Sometimes you're maintaining grape trellises, sometimes helping build a house. If that sounds like your cup of tea, go try this kind of volunteer travel. Most people are friendly and very interesting. However, that initial hellish experience did bring one good thing. That first pair of professionally depressed Beijingers reluctantly gave me the phone number of an auntie a few 100 kilometers away. She had a Kazakh-style yurt deep in Altay. To the excitement of my wilderness dreams, this yurt was located in the middle of nowhere. She rented it out from time to time. So when I finished my farm work, I called her. She sounded nice and said, "Sure, come stay." So I bought all the books I wanted to read, got on a bus, and moved in. The place was perfect, miles away from the nearest county town. I spent weeks doing nothing but wandering around shirtless, reading, and writing. It felt good to be young and on a mission, even if it felt like an impossible mission. Especially when all you need is some paper and a pencil. I remember many nights reading by candlelight in the yurt. Then spending the whole next day trying to write, and inevitably, accidentally imitating whoever I had read the night before. There was a Hemingway week, where the sky was vast, the poplar trees were thick as if on steroids, and every metaphor involved hard liquor and tough guys. There was an Eileen Chang week, where the grassland scenery was desolate and splendid, and I consumed so little fiber that I didn't poop for almost 2 weeks. However, something strange happened with the yurt life. After a few months, the novelty wore off, and I noticed I was going a bit crazy. The euphoria of the wilderness didn't appear. The hermit Shangri-La I imagined was nowhere to be found. I didn't feel any better about writing, nor about my prospects. Worse, I missed people. It was weird, I started to realize I didn't even know what I was originally looking for. Even weirder, I guess you'd call her landlady, auntie, and I became very close. She was the same age as my mom, and her child had just gone to Uremi for school. I think maybe she saw me as some kind of substitute son. I don't know, but every few weeks when she was in the county town, we would go for walks and hang out. She was very kind, very smart, and very humble. Quietly nodding and smiling while listening to my stupid 21-year-old musings on how the world works, never mocking me for being an idiot, which I was. I remember when I finally admitted what had triggered this whole breakdown, she was silent for a moment. Then she said very gently, "You will figure it out, but it takes time, and you have to accept that." Well, it turned out I didn't accept that. So I completely ignored this advice, because she was only more than twice my age. What did she know? One day I walked into town and stumbled upon a book about hiking routes in China, talking about crossing the Qinling Mountains or the Great Hangduan Mountains. This kind of trail is obviously very long, but some sections are marked okay. It's remote, but occasionally passes near villages or towns. It looked crazy, but people had done it before and survived. I quickly became obsessed with the idea of long-distance hiking. Maybe this was what I was missing. It's like living in the wilderness, just with more emphasis on exercise. But I couldn't just run off to a no-man's land. So, I decided to do some simple hiking around Xinjiang. The day I left the yurt, the landlady auntie drove me to the bus station. We were both quiet, the atmosphere very melancholy. When we hugged goodbye, I noticed she was crying. Honestly, I cried too. I realized I had made a friend, and ironically, she was the part one truly enjoyed in this experience where I was trying to be alone. An obvious fact was staring me in the face, but I was too young and too stupid to grasp it. It would take me another half-lifetime to figure it out. Anyway, I still think of my landlady auntie today. I hope you are doing well. That hiking trip was even more disastrous than my other plans. Weeks of getting lost, weeks of knowing this was a stupid idea but being too proud to quit. My tent leaked, my shoes rubbed my feet raw. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But I stuck with it until my body gave up on me. Then I gave up on myself too, really, and ran off to live a, well, not a life, but a kind of clumsy, makeshift existence. Anyway, 10 years passed just like that, as all decades do. Writing inexplicably actually became my job. The wilderness fantasy disappeared for a while. Or at least, it was much easier to get lost in the stupid forest of my mind. 10 years passed, got older, still didn't get wiser. Then, 10 years later, I found myself lost again. I had just finished writing a book. I was a mess. I had become so obsessed with trying to finish an impossible task that I literally lost my mind. Drinking with irrational enthusiasm. Sleeping on the soundproofing foam in my writing room because that was the only place I didn't feel guilty about not working while I slept. Couldn't finish the thing, yet couldn't let go. In hindsight, I should have just let it go. It was one of the worst things I've ever written. Anyway, I was pretty unhinged. By the time the book was done, I was pretty much done too. I couldn't write a single word, found no joy in it. This was a bit of a problem because writing had become the only thing in the world that made sense to me. It was the only thing that made everything else okay, not to mention it paid my rent. Nothing worked, I hated and abandoned everything. I started doubting myself 24/7. This went on for months. I knew it was a rich man's disease, but at the time it felt very real. The problem is, a person's imagination and sense of purpose cannot be bargained with, nor can they be coaxed. When they stop working for some reason, it feels like suffocation. As you may unfortunately already know, they don't listen to reason. You can only sit tight and wait until you feel like a human being again. Of course, there are workarounds, sure. But yes, your self-worth flushes down the drain in an instant, along with the ability to play. That's what left me, a fun, play. Those stupid daydreams I'd used as a refuge since I was a kid. I'm sure you know those daydreams. Without them, the real world was too cold, too desolate, and anyway, I was too bored and too cynical to live in it. All of this was originally an interesting adventure into a mild depressive episode in my early 30s, until I noticed. If I was reading or looking at things up close, when I looked away, my eyes took a long time to refocus. I say eyes because only my right eye can see, my left eye is basically a decorative free gift. So as you can imagine, I'm quite protective of my old right eye. Going to the ophthalmologist seemed like a good idea. It happened to be my 32nd birthday. Apparently, eye exams in your 30s are just as exciting as birthdays. The doctor scanned my eye with fancy equipment, shone lights, checked everything, and then said, "No problem, everything is normal." I said, "Yeah, but it's not right, focusing takes forever now." He looked down at my chart and said, "Oh, today is your birthday." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Happy birthday. You're old." I found this extremely funny and useless. Funny, but I must admit, it added a whole new dimension to the breakdown because of writing thing. Shouldn't I have written something good by now? I've had a long time. I'm not old yet, but I'm not young either. What the hell am I doing? I was supposed to have accomplished one thing by now, one thing I liked, one thing I was proud of. Damn ophthalmologist. So I was a bit depressed, and getting more depressed. A friend noticed my cheese had completely slid off the cracker, meaning a mental breakdown, and said, "You need to go do something else for a while." Something that doesn't involve worrying about work. Otherwise, you're going to break something inside, permanently. That thought hit me immediately. It was 10 years in the brewing. All that into the wild wilderness, Henry David Thoreau living off the land stuff. I remembered that book I found in Xinjiang 10 years ago. I said, I'm going to hike the Qinling Mountains, or do the Western Sichuan Loop. That's the trail with the bears, right? My friend said. Just for a few months, I said, I won't bring a laptop, no pen and paper. I'm going hiking. She said, yeah. I mean, wouldn't a weekend in Sonia be nice? And isn't that mountain full of wild beasts? This hiking route is very long, with an elevation gain equivalent to climbing Mount Everest several times. Many backpackers walk this path every year. It's not obscure. But actually, far fewer people complete the whole thing. Anyway, I didn't plan to finish it. I just wanted to walk until I felt better. And secretly, more importantly, until I could write again. That was my plan. To take a vacation while actually secretly working the whole time, no one could stop me. I researched it, and strangely, the cost of walking this path was even less than living at home. I didn't have to pay rent because I'd sleep in a tent. I already had most of the gear I needed. I also managed to find a ridiculously cheap plane ticket to Lebanon or Chengdu near the start of the hike. No reason not to do it. So, after suddenly realizing how stupid what I was doing was, last March, I found myself landing there. A few nights later, I nervously spread everything out on the hotel bed. Food, long johns, and toilet paper. Then realized this was it. This would be my life for the foreseeable future. Everything I owned was in a backpack, in the deep forest. What on earth did I think I was doing? The next morning, my uncertainty peaked, and I finally reached the trailhead to enter the mountain. The ranger or the innkeeper kindly looked at my bag. 30 gin, 15 kilograms, just right. About 20% of my body weight, though it felt like carrying a dead rhino. Chatted with a few other hikers for a while. They looked as nervous as I was about what was coming next. Then, well, one by one, we started walking. The road was lively at first, with families out for day trips. Climbed over a quite exhausting mountain pass. Then quickly, everything gave way to the forest, and I was alone. The first 10 kilometers or so were the approach trail. I don't know if it was designed this way on purpose, but it was quite clever. It kicks your butt just hard enough to ensure that if you don't belong here, you'll know it. My backpack was ridiculously heavy. Hundreds of kilometers like this? I couldn't imagine walking even another 5 kilometers. For this hike, I had trained several times a week for about a month before going up the mountain. That mountain was conveniently located a few subway stops from my apartment. It was always fun back then, throwing a few rujiamo, Chinese hamburgers, and a thermos of coffee into a backpack, strolling leisurely to the top. Every time I thought, man, I am so prepared for this hiking thing. If all it took was rujiamo, a thermos of coffee, and a misleading confidence in my weak legs that sat at a desk all day, I might actually have been prepared. In reality, on a long-distance hike, your life is on your back, which changes things drastically. Imagination is infinite, the spine is not. Within the first hour of actually stepping onto the mountain trail, I learned not to bite off more than I could chew. By noon, the weather got quite warm. The mountain path passed a stream, and I filtered some water from it. Ice cold and indescribably refreshing. This ritual quickly became one of my favorite parts of the day. Then continued into the woods. I walked until it was almost dark and stopped at a campsite. 4 or 5 other hikers had already settled in for the night. I clumsily tried to remember how to lay the ground sheet and pitch the tent, hard not to notice that everyone else seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Finally, I crawled into the tent and slept more soundly than I had in the past 5 years. I woke up when the sun rose and started the ritual I would do every day for the next while. Especially boiling water for tea. Since I planned to walk for a while, I decided most of my addictions could be quit. I could quit the occasional Sunday cigarette, weekday beer too. But if you can't drink a cup of fragrant tea in the morning, what is the point of being alive? There is absolutely no damn point. As a general rule, I thrive in chaos and disorder. But even I, on that first morning and all subsequent mornings, indulged in that simple joy, knowing where everything in the backpack belonged. When breaking camp, the Swiss Army knife and water filter, toothbrush and socks, all had their own little corners and pockets. Then, there was that more sublime joy, putting on that backpack, knowing that was everything you owned on this continent. On the first morning, things got real. My calves and butt hurt like hell. But I woke up in the woods that morning, and I would sleep in the woods that night. There was something very exciting about that. Finding out my shoes and backpack worked properly was also quite exciting. If you care about such things, I didn't before I started hiking. I used an Osprey Exos 48 backpack, wearing bright yellow Ultra Lone Peak 6 shoes. I cannot recommend these two things enough. They almost never gave me any trouble. For lunch, I ate instant noodles on a rock, surprised at how a bucket of braised beef noodles suddenly became so delicious after a morning of walking. Then set off again, thinking over and over. How are humans allowed in the wild? Until it was almost dark, I set up camp again, this time alone. I had camped alone many times before, but never this far deep in the Qinling Mountains. Okay, I thought. The woods became almost pitch black. To me, my little tent probably smelled like McDonald's to a bear or a wild boar, just your average McDonald's. What the hell am I doing here? Surprisingly, the woods are actually noisy at night. Or rather, loud. Owls gossiping with each other, wind poking at your tent canvas, things crawling past, or scuttling just a few feet from your head. You are in nature's house, after all. But the sleeping bag gives a primal sense of security. Maybe it's the same enclosed comfort we got from caves. I don't know, but somehow, a few layers of polyester felt like enough to keep you safe from whatever you imagined was coming to eat your eyeballs. This was the shape of my life for the next while. I would wake up, drink a bucket of coffee or tea, set off, eat lunch in a scenic spot, walk until I couldn't walk anymore, and then camp like the night before. I watched the sun go down. I cooked rice. Then I crawled into my sleeping bag to read. I should add, I read like I hadn't read since I was 15. Wearing a headlamp, in comfortable long johns. The March nights in the mountains were quite cold, which only made things cozier. Clinging to every word, like the first time I picked up a book. I had forgotten how to read like that. Those things I had put down halfway for years, Shishing's books, some Raymond Chandler, Haruki Murakami. Suddenly everything was fascinating. Everything I reread just because I could read. I devoured everything I could find. But overall, because of serious reading, everything became better. In the near silence of the forest, there is nowhere else to look for entertainment but your brain. And I had had enough of staying in my brain. Sometimes you share a campsite or a clearing with other hikers. Sometimes they come over to say hello. It's really that simple. This sounds crazy, but when preparing for this trip, I wasn't worried about beasts or dehydration, but about other hikers, that I would have to talk to them. As every introvert eventually learns, I learned to mimic extroversion, hoping my mimicry was passable. But to this day, meeting new people still feels like all my RAM is being taken up by a program I don't understand. It's very stressful, I don't look forward to it. But there, it wasn't like that. In life, the people you meet come from 1,000 different backgrounds. Maybe they're having a bad day, maybe you are. Maybe they want to scam you, maybe they're just kind for no reason. But figuring out what game you're playing takes a long time. On the mountain trail, there is only one background, and that is the trail. Just as you chose to go live in the woods for a while, so did they. This commonality makes every conversation instantly simple. Because you know what they're doing there, and they know what you are doing there. You are all heading in the same direction. Anyway, everyone I met was lovely. After about a week, a hiking zen descended. By the 3rd or 4th hour of walking in the morning, things would pop into my head. Daydreams, nostalgia, old friends, old plans, lots of awkward moments, lots of ghosts. Especially one ghost. I thought of myself 10 years ago, also in the woods of Xinjiang, much more naive. But have I really gotten smarter now? I feel just as lost. This is round 2, I've fallen into some stupid self-manufactured crisis again. Thousands of kilometers from home again, isolating myself again because I couldn't think of another way. Nothing has changed. I'm still that idiot. One morning while tying my shoelaces, a thought popped out of nowhere. I realized it was that dead-end feeling that broke me. That's why writing the last book destroyed me. It wasn't that working on the book was terrible. If it's for something fun, I love working. It was that hope. If I could pour myself into this thing, if I could somehow write truthfully enough or loudly enough, it would be a salvation. Somehow it would make me not filthy anymore. I would wake up the next morning healed, or at least better, finally a real person. When the book was finished and released, I woke up the next morning to find I was still me. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it still didn't work. That meant maybe nothing works. That's what was driving me crazy. That's what I was doing in the woods. Because if the only thing I enjoyed didn't work, I had to find something else. Suddenly, putting so much pressure on myself seemed so ridiculous. As if doing that had ever produced any good work. How did I forget that daydreams were supposed to be for fun? It wasn't for monetization or propping up the ego. It was for fun, for play. Somewhere along the way, I must have forgotten how to play. That was stupid. I was stupid. I remembered a quote. Ursula K. Le Guin, in my opinion, one of the greatest writers of all time, and if anyone disagrees, they are objectively wrong, said shortly before she died about writing. The name of our beautiful reward is not profit. Its name is freedom. Maybe it was because of that almost offensively beautiful forest. Maybe it was the joy of having enough toilet paper for the next few days. But a new thought hit me, a hopeful thought. At least I was never particularly confused about what I wanted to do. Never. Since I was a teenager, I knew I would either dedicate myself to doing something with words, because I loved them, because they were music, because stories are really just metaphysical investigations of reality with characters added. Or I would spend the rest of my life trying to do it. This was non-negotiable. No other job or path made sense to me. I don't know why it's like this, but it has always been like this. How lucky I am. I realized, whether by biological accident, miswired brain, or lack of character, I am this way. I know many people who aren't like this, who never had this compulsive calling, and they are doing fine. Usually, they are sensible, pay their bills, and seem quite content with life. But a sensible life never really appealed to me. I was simply too incompetent. Even if futile, I liked the feeling of walking toward the big mountain. That mountain of one day I might actually make something equally beautiful. I don't know how else I could live. I suddenly realized how unfathomably lucky it is to have this obsession. Even if it occasionally spirals into borderline madness and self-pity. Like in the woods of the Qinling Mountains. Like 10 years ago on another continent. Like might happen again 10 years from now. But I am lucky. I should probably remember this, I thought. I tied my shoes, looked down at the ridiculously absurd beauty below. Then put on my backpack, set off, and kept walking, not thinking about writing for weeks. In the beginning on the trail, it was hard not to play a quiet game in my head, I wonder who will quit. This almost never worked. One evening, I watched a couple walk into camp, clearly packed for an Antarctic expedition, carrying huge bags of snacks and those delicate folding chairs people take to music festivals. Okay, they won't make it, I thought. A few weeks later I met this couple. They were doing great, except the chairs and snack bags were gone, but they were still doing great. Others, built like fitness instructors, practically leaping up the mountain, would suddenly quit because of random injuries or just not liking the woods. Except for injuries, there was no pattern. I found the only reliable sign of whether someone would stick with it was whether they wanted to stick with it. Weirdos seemed to have a special advantage, and the mountain trail was full of benevolent weirdos. There was a guy in a hanfu skirt. I never really got to know him, but we hiked at roughly the same pace and kept bumping into each other. I fondly remember climbing over a quite unpleasant peak, and he was already at the top. "We made it," he shouted, reaching out to congratulate me. I went to shake his hand, then realized he was peeing with the other hand at the same time. I feel this is more charming and indicative of character than anything else I can tell you. I also walked with a big brother from Guangzhou for a while, and I immediately fell into brotherly love with him. One morning we split up. At the time, he suggested drinking some baijiu, Chinese liquor, might make the day's hike easier. I declined, not particularly wanting to get wasted at breakfast. Then set off to find him again. By then, he had already recruited some new friends to join his wake and drink club. They sat silently by a mountain shrine, faces extremely red. "You guys aren't walking today, are you?" I said. He shook his head and opened a bag of peanuts. I never saw him again. In my experience, that's how friendship on the trail works. They quickly become deep and honest, but also fleeting, with no expectations. Another friend I met was a painter from Beijing, the very talented kind. The annoying kind who claims he's just messing around, then shows you a painting on the level of 1,000 li of rivers and mountains. We walked together for a few days, had a great time complaining about housing prices and clients. Then he stopped in a village for a day, and I kept walking, thinking we wouldn't meet again. A week later it snowed, snow so heavy that walking seemed like an extremely bad idea. I pitched my tent, hid inside reading about Richard Feynman's various exploits all day, eating compressed biscuits. At sunset, I heard someone pitching a tent near me. They came over to ask if I needed help brushing the snow off my tent. We chatted through the tent for a while. Then he tentatively called my name. I tentatively called his name back. I crawled out, and of course, it was that painter friend. In my memory, we performed an impromptu reunion dance in the snow. The kind of dance a dog does when you take the leash down for a walk. Since there was no other entertainment, and we were freezing to death. It was a party, a great party. Scarcity is the name of the game. Maybe I remember it wrong, but I really like a theory by Lacan: we don't desire things, we desire the feeling of desiring itself. Things are incidental. Scarcity is a quite interesting way to toy with your desire protocols. After a week in the woods, a stray Oreo in the food bag is a feast. Phone battery life just enough to win a game of chess against you is as fun as a night of tipsiness. One day, I was in a bit of pain from a blister, looked down at my shoes, and noticed those little holes at the top that no one seemed to use. Tentatively, I threaded my laces through them, and never got a blister again. It felt like an achievement, no different from discovering nuclear fusion. This was the best thing to happen in weeks. Another reward to look forward to was trail magic. Sometimes you're coming down a mountain, cursing yourself for being born. And by the roadside, some old hikers or just inexplicably kind local villagers would set up a table, offering tea, fruit, even guacamole, stuffed flatbread. And everything you've been fantasizing about. Asking for no money in return, and happy to stand and chat with you. It was a miracle. Another day was nearly a miracle. You meet a lot of section hikers on the trail, people just out for a day or a weekend. I got chatting with a few uncles on a self-driving tour, out for a catch-up walk. They teased me mercilessly on the topic of regional discrimination, and I teased them mercilessly about their so-called health liquor. By the way, that's nonsense. Anyway, these uncles said, "All right, if you stop at the campsite near our car, beer is on us." I thought it was a joke and tried not to think about it. I'm not a foodie, I don't miss hot pot or barbecue. In the woods, I only craved one thing, and that was ice-cold beer. Not to get drunk, or even to relieve the day's fatigue. Just that kind of ice-cold beer to put a period on doing a hard thing. I kept thinking about this. We got to the campsite, said goodbye, and the old guys strolled over to their off-road vehicle, maybe a few kilometers away. I set up my tent, stared into the void for a while. About 40 minutes later, a giant hand reached into my tent and handed me a can of that deadly wusu. One of the uncles had walked a not short distance just to bring me a beer, just to be kind. Then walk back to their car. I was so grateful I almost cried. That night I watched the sun go down, drinking undisputedly the best beer of my life. I think what most hikers enjoy there is exactly the same thrill I got. That is the constant feeling that you are all on an adventure. Because overall, roaming without getting lost, without a prescient plan, is very enjoyable. Spending a few days alone, getting tired of your own company, then accidentally meeting the best companion you've had in a long time. One night I felt a bit lonely, camping by a stream, and a guy passed by to get water. We confirmed we were both readers, and somehow we got to talking about our shared love for certain philosophers. When I looked at my watch, about 3 hours had passed. We went back to the camp. His girlfriend had already started a fire. Then 2 more hikers joined. When we all played that private game in our heads of is anyone here a bad guy and satisfied ourselves that it was unlikely, we watched the darkness surround us until the campfire was the only visible light in the whole forest. Just like that, a group of strangers, occupying a tiny orange universe together. Outside there was nothing, only each other to trust. Many nights were like this. I started to enjoy this feeling very much. I won't pretend there were no low periods. I won't pretend there were no unsettling times. One night I woke up and heard something huge, not quite human, prowling near my tent. Someone told me the wild boars and even black bears here are quite dangerous if they think their cubs are in danger. But I didn't sleep well for the rest of that night. Really only one day things went wrong, and very wrong. The mountain trail generally has red ribbons or spray paint markers telling you if you are on the right path. Hard to miss them. One night I was eavesdropping on 2 hikers talking about how one of them got briefly lost that day, and I thought, come on, how can you get lost on a marked trail? The universe was listening, and she has a dark sense of humor. The next day I tried to cover more distance than I should have. I was in a rush. I turned at a marker, and after a while, the path started to look a bit patchy. In some places, the markers disappeared, but maybe it was just poorly maintained. Plus I had just come down a mountain, no interest in walking back up. Another kilometer or 2 later, the path completely disappeared, turning into arrow bamboo forest. I turned around and realized I couldn't even find the way I came. Stay calm, I thought. You can't be too far from the main trail. But I was indeed lost. I somehow walked a long way in the wrong direction, totally unaware of which direction I came from. I cautiously wandered for about an hour, found nothing, quite clear that I was just getting myself deeper lost, further from the trail. A few weeks ago, the woods always felt big but inexplicably like home. You didn't know where you would end up, but you knew where you were going. Suddenly, the woods were still big, but that bigness felt very lonely and ominous. I finally panicked. Only for about 20 minutes. But as you know, 20 minutes of panic is about equivalent to 3 years of most other emotions. Headlines flashed in my mind, certain backpacker missing for days, etc. I tried everything, retracing my steps, didn't work, listening for other people's voices, trying to use phone GPS, but the battery died days ago. Finally, I decided to bet everything on one throw. I walked straight north. If I just walked in generally the north direction, maybe I would find the path again. I had come downhill, so I picked a mountain that looked like it faced north and climbed it. About an hour later, miraculously, I found the path again. I wasn't even that far from it. But I had never wanted to kiss the dirt so much. I noticed a few trees with peeling bark and realized in my stupid rush, I probably saw something similar, thought it was a marker, and turned wrong. I never laughed at stories of people getting lost again. I also never got lost on the trail again. Physically or emotionally. It was a relief. Doing only one thing a day, and that is arriving at where you are going. When that is the only thing on your mental checklist, it's hard to worry about anything, hard to be stressed about anything. All your waking hours are spent in nature, trudging through evolutionary imagination, and feeling small because of it. I cannot tell you how beautiful this mountain is. It cannot be described in words, cannot be exhausted by vision. Inevitably, things from deep inside surface. You think of people you haven't thought of in years. Replaying arguments, replaying kindness. Thinking of your parents, your friends, your cat. Wow, my cat. I was always thinking about my cat, he should be thinking about my cat too. Inevitably, you realize what an anxious jerk you've been to yourself for such a long time. Every day, every minute of every day. I can't believe all this beauty has been there all along. There thousands of years before I was born, will still be there thousands of years after I die. Withstanding the physics of trees. All of this moving slowly and unstoppably at its own pace, by comparison, my life is like a mayfly. Red birch, fir, azaleas, all towering above you in a vermilion kaleidoscope. Peaks stretching to the horizon behind and ahead. Below is a complete silent world. If you look too long, it will make you cry. This is ridiculous. This is absurd. This is China. Occasionally stopping in villages or towns has its beauty too. The beauty of sleeping in a bed, the beauty of ordering a big plate chicken, da panji, the beauty of walking around all day without carrying anything. I like people serving me big plates of hot food, calling me brother or to handsome. Felt like the most pampered cat in the temple. I learned to look at small shops with fresh and fascinated eyes. Spending 20 minutes carefully studying the snack section, looking for all the treats I would take back to my room. The whole fridge was full of drinks and beer. I kept thinking, we have so much beer in civilized society, and it's easy to buy, why wasn't I drinking it all the time? In a supply town, I drank 3 or 4 bottles of beer, then went out for a walk. Just as I was leaving the restaurant, I noticed why the boss was a bit cautious about whether I wanted one last glass. The homemade liquor there was very strong. On the way back to the inn, the alcohol hit me. I fell into a ditch by the roadside, noticing I was unusually drunk. I got back to the inn and realized I forgot my room number. The staff there started insisting they had no record of me. I started insisting this was ridiculous because I just checked in that afternoon. I really wanted to go to sleep. Bye-bye. He was friendly but clearly thought I was crazy, which made me more frustrated. Arguing with the inverse logic only alcohol can produce. The less sense your point makes, the more firmly you believe it. Just as I was about to start becoming passive-aggressive, I pulled the key card out of my pocket. Then noticed, in fact, I was staying at a completely different inn next door. I told him I was going for a walk and apologized without explanation. The local customs here are very strange, but also very lovely. For most of us who have always lived in cities, it's a shock because we think we know what China is like. But if you haven't seen those semi-open-air toilets, or people suddenly greeting you and starting a conversation just because they want to say hello, you don't know the other side of it. In the city, this usually signals you're about to be sold something, or meet a scammer. But there, it works. It's extroversion, it's kindness. I don't know why we don't do this. I also started to like watching TV. Halfway through a ball game, commercials would suddenly interrupt to sell some magical medicinal liquor or fertilizer. All right then. I really like these resting towns. But after about a day, a familiar feeling would hit. A longing to start walking again. Knowing all you have to do is go to the supermarket, buy some food and toilet paper. At any moment of your choosing, you can stroll back into the woods. Every time, as long as I had enough books on my Kindle and the hangover faded, that's exactly what I did. Later on, things became quite comfortable and wonderful. Because the long-distance hikers still on the trail were likely serious and had adapted to this life. Compared to people you meet in town, hikers live at a different rhythm. Early to rise, early to bed. Usually have strange and interesting things to say. Know how to remove ticks and hang bare bags. This is a parallel universe. A universe that became so natural to me that going to town for supplies felt like a fake reality. But my favorite part was the culture of self-sufficiency. After a few hundred kilometers, everyone became wildly self-sufficient. They wouldn't throw it in your face, you just knew. If you gave them a rubber band and a thumbtack and said, "Please build me a voice-activated laser-guided crossbow," they might actually do it. It even started to affect me. I liked the days alone, knowing I brought myself here on my own clumsy feet. I liked building fires. I liked finally knowing what lacquer trees looked like so I wouldn't have to spend another week unable to sit down. I especially liked that I didn't die, which must be partly to my credit. But I wasn't made of titanium like other professional hikers. Anyway, I didn't plan to walk the whole way. After a while, I decided I had probably received the message and hung up the phone. An elder in the family had just passed away. Some things were happening 2,000 kilometers from where I lived. Staying in the woods these days started to look like ignoring my life. It felt like an ending. I hitched a ride back to Chengdu, near where I started. Enjoyed a shower. Then retired my brief identity as a hiker. There was only one thing left to do in this area. Another thing I had dreamed of for years. That was the Xinjiang Satellite Launch Center. That is a sanctuary for space fans like me. I rented a car and drove over. It was simply heaven. Real Long March rockets, and those engineers. You could walk right up and talk to them. So I walked up and talked to them. I'll try to be vague to preserve their dignity. But one engineer chatted with me about an astronaut who had walked in space. That engineer had worked with them. "My God," I said, "you worked with a real spaceman? What was he like?" The engineer paused for a second, glanced thoughtfully at the model hanging from the ceiling, and said, "Jerk. A total jerk." I almost burst out laughing. Then visited a friend, and soon I was back home. I spread my hiking gear in the apartment hallway for a while so I could trip over it and remember how wonderful it all was. I followed the moments of those hiker friends who kept walking, experiencing it vicariously through them for a while. But it was weird because I noticed the Henry David Thoreau wilderness fantasy finally disappeared. This confused me. I didn't come back with any epiphany or stories. I didn't rush to my desk to write anything down. Why did I feel better? I walked around the apartment for a while, hung out on the bed with the cat, folded clothes. No, still the me from before I left. Where did that wilderness stuff go? Sometimes I still think about a day on the trail. When a big sister and her son kindly gave me a ride to town. The son was about 16, ridiculously smart, regardless of age. Actually asked me what I was doing on the trail. I answered I wasn't sure. He said, "You know, a lot of people out there are just trying to," he rolled his eyes for effect, "find themselves." I thought. I just walked hundreds of kilometers in the woods carrying all my belongings, with only my mental friction for company. Woodland creatures with big teeth kept trying to steal my food. Last night I pooped in a hole in the snow. I'm not going to listen to a kid lecture me on lifestyle. Then I realized. Oh, he might be right, isn't he? Many people I met on the trail were in a transition phase of life. Just graduated, just quit a job. Many were there just because they liked quiet and walking. But it is definitely a place to think. I guess that's why I went too. Getting no revelation from it is a revelation in itself. I think it was one night a few months after coming home that everything became clear. I went for a beer with a friend. We laughed our heads off, drinking like sailors. He asked me why I went to the woods in the first place. I told him about the book, about blowing a few circuits, about going crazy. Then, in that annoying, clever way of boiling complex problems down to a snappy one-liner, he said, "So you weren't very inspired?" "No," I said, "and you can't control when you get inspired." "No," I said. "Well," he asked, "would you want to control it?" The problem was solved instantly. Because of course I wouldn't. Of course no one would. Just like you wouldn't like tickling yourself. Those misguided aha moments are few and far between. But precisely because they are few and far between, they are special. That is what makes them beautiful. When you sign up for a lifestyle that involves trying to turn them into something, like I stupidly did, you also sign up for their unpredictability. That is how it works. That is how it always works. That is the deal. The quiet months are part of the deal. Once the imagination goes dormant for a while, in this disaster you have only one job. Sit tight. And remember, this is not a disaster. Your brain will come back online. But you ask too much of it, it needs a reset. Sit tight, you idiot, this is just another small crisis. Survived the others, you almost don't remember them now. That night I came home, opened the folder. Inside were all my stupid, might be a thing but might not be story ideas. They weren't great. But they weren't the disaster I saw them as during my breakdown months ago. This is still the game I've been playing. Everyone is playing. Keep moving. Oh, I realized, it was laid out so glaringly in front of me, only an idiot like me would miss it. I was supposed to be here, wasn't I? Here, in the place that finally became home after decades of searching. Here, where my friends are. Here, are me in a strange, imperfect but perfect Dali, or wherever you live. I walked into the hallway, played with the straps of the hiking backpack for a while, thinking how strange it was that it once held my entire life. Finally realizing I am not a hiker. I am a cat. Dogs come to you for help when they are sick, they need you and are not ashamed of it. Cats, in my experience, isolate themselves. They shut down. Most heartbreakingly, when they think they're going to die, they go somewhere to die alone. I do the same thing. Don't want to die. But when encountering problems in this world, flee this world to try to solve it. It's like trying to debug code by throwing the computer out the window and joining the circus. This is not a good reason to go to the woods. This is you wanting to use the woods for your own ends, that is not why the trees are there. I now find myself in this strange position, realizing Christopher McCandless, the protagonist of Into the Wild, that movie I felt I watched lifetimes ago, held the answer to his own problem, and mine. That answer was there all along. Just shortly before things went bad, he scrawled a sentence in the margins of his Dr. Zhivago. Happiness only real when shared. I really thought I could run off to live like a hermit and come back with answers for myself. But our inner life is not an equation to be solved. There is no grand unified theory of us. We don't get things arranged and then live in an emotional utopia for the rest of our lives. It's more like a series of small fires that need to be constantly put out. Hoping to learn to turn it into a dance. Nowadays I don't believe that if a person is sad or something is broken inside, the answer is a cabin in the woods. Of course there are isolationists. Of course there are introverts. Of course some people just like hiking or living outside and aren't running from anything. But for those feeling low because of something, or disoriented by something, in a pinch, I think we often hide out of shame, when actually if we just honestly said what was going on in our heads, our friends would care from the bottom of their hearts and try to help. Those friends I told about my slight madness in March because of that terrible book, always said pretty much the same thing. Why the hell didn't you tell me? I should have told them. They would have joked, would have downplayed it. I don't know if they could fix that thing, but it certainly would have stopped the problem from getting bigger. If you have the urge to run into the woods, go. China has so many beautiful, quiet meadows waiting to be stumbled upon. I cannot tell you how great your adventure will be. Mine was fun, yours will surely be better. Please do lots of this. But in my limited experience, when I truly look back on it, the real adventure is someone you know doing something you didn't expect. Or trying to remember how you fixed yourself after a melancholic period, and realizing it was largely thanks to someone kindly standing in the background of your life. Doing it quietly from a distance, while you didn't even realize. I would even gently suggest, maybe the strangest adventure, maybe the most humbling adventure, happens inside. Discovering those parts of yourself you never acknowledged. Discarding the self you never liked. And constantly realizing you will soon turn into another person. And who that person is decided by the current you in every moment. in 2 minutes, and another 2 minutes. Until 10 years later, after a long string of 2 minutes, you find a new you sitting there. You're not even sure where they started or where they will end. This makes us some kind of custodians, looking after this body until a new, hopefully better us, inhabits it after a while. Maybe you know a book called 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. It's very funny. Considering it was written by a Victorian, it's weird. And, following the custom of popular writers having a moment in the sun and then fading from view, he wrote a book called Paul Kelver after a while. That book was obscure then, and is almost completely forgotten now. But I hope it is never completely forgotten, simply because of this passage. Coming home on this particular day, I stopped on the bridge and watched the lazy barges pass between the piers for a while. It was one of those still summer evenings when even the air of the gloomy city is full of whispers. As I turned from the river and passed through the white toll gate, I had a feeling of leaving myself behind on the bridge. The impression was so vivid that I looked back, half expecting to see myself still leaning on the iron rail, looking down at the sunlit water. I think it all goes on. I think it doesn't stop until we stop. Life stage follows life stage. The illusion of understanding is inevitably usurped by stranger problems that follow. Then, those strangers who came into your life bearing solutions are no longer strangers, but friends. In the face of such constant loss of control, the only control one can truly maintain is whether we choose to dance or despair. Just as Joanna Newsom sang, the nullifying, defeating, negating, repeating joy of life. This process of constantly thinking you've got it all figured out, then starting over with new problems. Finishing the final theory about you and the world, then realizing it's just the start of a whole class of new theories about you and the world, many of which you will never solve. So you say goodbye to the final theory. Is that not okay? I think it is okay. Rediscovering yourself, rediscovering the world. All those basements below, all those bell towers above. Isn't it cool to be reshaped? I will keep walking until I can't walk anymore, like all of us. Walk off the balcony, walk into the blue morning. Hopefully with friends. We will find more friends and walk with them. I hope, stumbling, regrouping, stumbling, regrouping. I hope we will remember. I hope I will remember there is beauty in all of this. We do walk out of the darkness. We are pulled out by the hands of those we love more often than we crawl out ourselves. I hope we remember there is beauty in all of this. We do walk out of the darkness. We are here now, and that is enough. We do this together. I think that's enough. I think that's enough.